Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I am very well, thank you. Yeah.
Great, good to hear.
How's work going?
Work has been busy this year, very busy. Very few sort of moments to take a breath, but it's been enjoyable. It's been challenging. I also decided to get a screen print studio this year.
I saw that.
Tried to basically force myself to make personal work. So lots of my week is trying to sort of shimmy the work into 4 days rather than 5 days, so I can go and screen print on a Friday. So yeah, that's been challenging, but it's been really enjoyable, and it's nice to make things with my hands.
Something to look forward to at the end of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. We recently moved into a studio, and it's lovely, and it's great to be around people again, because we moved to Brighton just before the pandemic, and worked from home for like the last 2 years. So yeah, in January we got a studio space, and we now share a studio space with sort of 8 other people, which is really nice. But I found sort of after like 2 years of being on my own that sort of it gets a bit much too sometimes, and it's nice to go off to my studio space where I screen print and I don't see anybody, I don't talk to anybody, I just put my music on, and it's just sort of
okay.
and I'm just with myself and just printing and focusing on that. It's a nice way to finish the week. You're right.
Yeah, you like putting your blinkers on and having a day of peaceful printing.
Yeah, even if it goes terribly wrong, you spend 4 days sort of getting your head down to make that day that you can go off and do it. It's a craft, and I've been really enjoying it. It's a nice thing to focus on. It's a sort of long-term sort of thing that I'm working on at the moment. It's sort of pushing my work into more print stuff.
Yeah, great. Well, before we get too far in, maybe you could just introduce yourself to my audience.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Michael Driver. I'm a freelance illustrator. I graduated back in 2015. Since then, I've worked sort of more or less completely freelance. I had a short period of time where I worked at a tech startup as an in-house illustrator. I'm signed to Folio Illustration Agency. And yeah, most of my work's in editorial, although it's starting to change to be more like brand advertising, animation, which is nice. Yeah, I guess that's me.
Great.
Yeah.
Can you remember what first got you interested in illustration?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So when I was like 15 or 16, it was sort of like the advent of social media. I was like a big MySpace kid, and those were the days. Social media was just as wild as it is now, and sort of a budding music scene came around. Lots of sort of screaming metal and hardcore, and my city, Nottingham, where I'm from, used to put on a lot of shows. A lot of like sort of pub venue kind of gigs, and they're all like under 18s. So I used to go to a lot of them, and in going to them, I sort of discovered sort of like merch and apparel design, and I used to sort of get, the whole thing was very tribal, like MySpace, like wearing a certain band, liking a certain band was like kind of a thing, and not liking other bands was also a thing. And I kind of fell in love with a lot of like the merch designs, and then discovered a website called Empties, which was where sort of all of these illustrators were sort of like posting the work. So it was kind of like a t-shirt forum, the t-shirt design.
Okay.
So I sort of geeked out about that stuff for a few years. I finished up just like my normal A-levels and decided that was sort of me done with like education. I kind of felt there's some bureaucracy with like some of my tutors, and I ended up getting moved around a bit, and my grades were really bad. Also, I skipped off college quite a lot, which didn't really help with getting good grades.
Okay.
And yeah, I'd been working part-time as a chef, and like a KP, and a position opened up at a restaurant, and they offered me a job. I got about 6 or 8 months into working full-time there as a commis chef, which, they were really lovely people. They really looked after me, but it was really bloody hard work, and it doesn't pay very well at all for the amount of hours that you work. And yeah, I got a few months in and sort of realised that I needed to kind of find a lane, or something that sort of was more my cup of tea. And I thought about all the stuff that I was into, and illustration seemed like a big interest, and I decided to sort of reapply for my art foundation and go for it. And then sort of went on to go to university and sort of get here, I guess.
Great. You went to Kingston, right?
Yeah, I went to Kingston and studied illustration and animation, but I mainly focused on sort of illustration. There was a pathway which would allow you to split off, but I just never split off. I just stayed to sort of still stuff.
Yeah.
Sort of in hindsight, I wish I'd have gone off and done some animation stuff, but I think sort of my career would be very different at this point if I had. I think it's just more the technical abilities. I just love to have them as part of my skill set. Yeah.
Is it a good course at Kingston?
Yeah, it was a good course. It was very conceptually led. We had a guy called Mark Harris who was a fine art tutor, and he mainly focused on ideas. So there wasn't very much like, today we're going to be doing a book cover project. It was more like, we had like a funny book called Blank Object, and it was sort of like about just putting two objects together and making them look like nice. I think we tried to make a kite out of an umbrella and some string, but people were doing all sorts of stuff like sticking Allen keys in juice boxes and yeah, it was.
Oh, the old Allen key juice box project. Sure.
Hey, I tell you what, it works. It works really well. Sip so much juice through that. But yeah, it was good. I kind of have sort of like my gripes with the course. I think sort of on the back end, it would have been helpful to have spent some time talking about things like contracts and sort of more practical side of becoming an illustrator, because most people that leave an illustration course end up having to work for themselves. Like, I kind of thought that media companies would have hired more illustrators, especially seeing that we're in such a like content heavy landscape now.
Yeah.
But it hasn't really changed how I thought it would. So yeah, like most of us have to be freelance, and it could have just done with a little bit more sort of on the contract side of things and budgets and stuff.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. It was certainly the case with my course. I think a lot of courses are catching up now and teaching that stuff because it's essential,
Yeah, and I think you have to. We all pay so much money for our education now. I think education also needs to make sure that people are leaving educated enough to go into like a workplace. But yeah, I feel like art school is one of those weird places where you've got this sort of very like 90s like liberal view where it's like throw paint around and have fun. But I guess with illustration, like you have to rein it in at some point and do some business stuff, because or else how are you ever gonna, function as a professional illustrator, I guess.
But we don't want freelancers learning too much about that stuff, or I'd be out of a job.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
I'm just kidding. Can you tell us a little bit about what the early days of your illustration career were like?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'm gonna do like a small, like go slightly before that, and then move on to that, because I think that's sort of interesting and sort of makes sense of like my trajectory. Obviously, I went to my foundation and then went on to study at Kingston. But whilst I was on my foundation and whilst I was at Kingston, the real driving force I had behind me was sort of like a fear of going back to like a really arduous, like hard job. So the minute I learned how to use Photoshop, I sort of became incredibly obsessive with sort of using social media to show art and submitting my art to things. So I'd like submit stuff to like open calls for zines, gallery shows, intern at like places like Pick Me Up and LCAF. And that kind of got the ball rolling to the point where when I was in third year, sort of hanging my degree show, I got contacted about representation. And I think my first job was maybe like a week after we'd hung my final show, which was for the Telegraph. And around that time, I was picked as an It's Nice That graduate and a creative review graduate. And I got quite a lot of features and was in a lot of group shows. So that was sort of the start.
So you were picked up by an agent at your degree show?
Yeah, I was picked up by Making Pictures. They have sort of like an illustration wing. From what I remember, Tim previously was the agent at YCN, but YCN stopped being an illustration agency.
Okay.
I think he took a lot of talent with him to Making Pictures. And yeah, they were the first people to sign, to get in contact about signing with them. And I said yes, because at the time we had like lots of great talent, like Owen Gildersleeve and Toby Triumph and Dan Woodger, and Alec Doherty, like really sort of stand out sort of illustrators. And I thought, well, if these guys are with MP, then it would make sense for me to sign.
Yeah. Why not?
My career amongst some quite notable illustrators. But yeah, that was sort of like my degree show. And then things kind of really started kicking off when I got the It's Nice That graduate feature. I don't think I'll ever return to the sheer excitement and also fear of that article being posted, and then the amount of work that came in instantaneously afterwards. It was like maybe 10 to 15 jobs. Like, it was really crazy.
That's amazing.
I think forever I'll chase that high, but it was really crazy.
So that's a pretty good start.
Yeah, it was a pretty good start. Just after graduating around this time, we found a house in Putney, and it was an absolute hellhole. There was 10 of us living there. It was right under the District and Circle line. Trains used to go over the top of our house every 2 or 3 minutes, because the front of our house sat on the facade of a train bridge. So it just used to rattle.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I've only ever seen in movies.
It feels very Harry Potter, very Harry Potter. And we had all sorts of issues like rats and mice. But I got a job at a Green King brewery, just pub, just working in the kitchen. And I did 2 or 3 shifts, and it was horrible. Like frying everything, sticking stuff in a combi oven, I originally came in as a KP, and then basically found out on my second shift that all the other chefs had left, and I was just expected to cook all the food.
Oh, good.
And it was really hectic. And then It's Nice That feature came out, and I just looked at the work and just thought, this doesn't make any sense to keep coming to this place. So I handed my notice in straight away. So it was a good swerve. Swerve.
Lucky. There are a lot of newer artists and more experienced artists that need other jobs to support them in doing freelance work. So you made the right choice, and it's good that you got those opportunities.
It was very financially precarious, though. I think I've got about £400 left of my overdraft.
Right.
It was quite risky, and for the first 2 or 3 months, it was very tight financially. It was not a clever move. In hindsight, I think I would have done it different, really genuinely.
Okay.
But yeah, very fortunate. But like I said, all the work started at university. Like I was really serious about getting sort of stuck in and trying to make a name for myself before graduating. And yeah, I remember our last project at university was like a skills project. And we were basically allowed to do anything. And I basically got my partner Lizzie to send me editorial briefs, like 1 or 2 a day. And I would just like sort of play art director with her. And that sort of like bulked up my portfolio to about 15 or 20 images. And I animated them all as well.
Oh, amazing.
So, yeah, the animation was really jank, like really rubbish. But it was a good way to get that sort of like brain working and get like the portfolio topped up. Because sometimes I feel like at university you only get so many projects a term, and it's not necessarily always enough to have like a really strong sort of industry ready portfolio.
Yeah, you need to. I mean, once you graduate with a portfolio full of different kinds of projects, but very rarely is that portfolio ready to go out into the real world. You need to, like you say, top it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew going in that like editorial would be like my bread and butter. It'd be where sort of I'd find the money from month to month to go for it, and be able to support myself. So it just kind of made sense at that point to just like go full guns blazing into doing editorial stuff rather than sort of like thinking that I would be doing like big ad campaigns the minute I got out of uni, or publishing, which sort of lives within its own sort of like time.
Takes time, and editorial is a great place to start. What was your first? What was your first real project?
First real project was first project I got contacted about was a thing for the BBC, which was like 6 images. That then got pulled because we fell out over copyright. But shortly afterwards, I got a job for the Telegraph for the property section. I think Making Pictures might have like some sort of contract with the Telegraph for their Q&A sections.
Okay.
And then sort of a few days later, an image or 2 for the Washington Post for something to do with like neighborhood security.
Nice. Good start.
Yeah. It was a good start. And what I remember from that time period was that like my sort of practice was just not at all ready for commercial work. Like at the time, say if I was drawing like a scene and it'd have like a bush in it, or like say it had like a bush in it, I would shade every single leaf and sort of like I'd just go really over the top of textures. So I remember doing quite a few late nights on like what I would probably spend like half a day on now. And that's not to say that the work's got worse now. It's just I sort of worked out how my work works in sort of like a commercial setting, I guess.
Learning what to leave out is equally as important as, you know, putting all your skills into every image.
I think what I realized is quite quickly is that like whilst it's really nice to pump details into things when you've got the time, like sometimes some of the things that you're actually working on only really exist as like a few centimeters by a few centimeters, and so pumping all that detail, lots of it's going to get lost in the printing process anyway, especially when it's newspapers and they print like CMYK. That's not to say that I don't love pumping details into things, but it just kind of was like, this spot is like 5 centimeters by 2 centimeters. Why am I spending like 2.5 days on this? I guess at the time it was important because the work that you do gets you more work, and especially when I just got going, it felt like a sort of like co-signed by the Telegraph or a co-signed by the Guardian was sort of helping me build sort of like that trustfulness that I needed with other clients.
And you want to make your best first impression, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if it means staying up till 3 a.m.
Yeah, I was not a good person to be around at that point in time. Just an absolute mess of a human. But hey, who isn't a mess in their early 20s?
And mid-20s and late 20s sometimes, so for some people.
And 30s.
Do you if you got an agent straight out of university, do you feel like you missed out on any learning opportunities in terms of building your own freelance business and doing the hard slog yourself of finding clients?
Yes, like absolutely. And it's really hard to talk about because I'm in the fortunate position where I did get signed like straight away. And it's the thing that I really, really struggled with is, whilst I know what my work looks like commercially, there's lots of illustrators that have like their shtick or their thing that they get hired for. And I feel like because I went straight into freelancing, like I never really got to explore what my angle was on things. So I know what my sort of like quote unquote style is, but I don't know like where my creative voice kind of lies. And that's why I'm sort of doing this printing thing now and exploring that. And I've sort of dipped my foot in doing some like clean NFTs to try and sort of like work out where this is all going and sort of keep exploring, I guess. But yeah, it's a very fortunate position to be in. I feel like I couldn't say it enough, but yeah, there's a few friends, and when you want like really nice environmental work, you go to them because you know. But yeah, it's...
You just cut out there. Could you skip back a few seconds?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's an incredibly fortunate place to be. I couldn't possibly say it like anymore. Like it is just very fortunate, and I kind of feel like I just missed out on some stuff. You know, like I've got friends that if you want a particular type of thing doing, you go to them. So like, for instance, they do like lots of work about environmentalism, or they're really sort of led in a particular style. That is, I'm sort of really struggling to pull something out of my head. You think they've
had more time to explore that, whereas you, I mean, not that it's anything to complain about, but you would head first into the commercial world where other people were telling you what to make.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So there was very little time to think about like, what is my sort of angle on this thing, or like what are my interests, because I'm so interested in so much stuff, and like I'm a real collector of things. You can see by all the stuff behind me, like, most of this stuff's mine. Like it almost becomes sort of like oversaturated in my head, and I don't really know what it is that is me, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
But that's a process of me making more personal work and not making personal work to get more work. I think that's the other thing. Like when I was first starting out, I used to make lots of like mock editorial and mock book covers and things like that to continue to convince people that I could work in editorial. And I did that for like at least 3 or 4 years. Like I used to sort of draw up roughs that didn't get accepted, and post them online and add them to my portfolio. And yeah, I think it's only in the sort of last year or so that I've started to think about what does my art look like outside of commercial art. And I think quite a few jobs have come in the last year or two because I'm making the stuff that I'm making, I'd say.
No doubt.
Yeah, I think it will forever be a process of trying to understand what that work is.
You make a lot of work. Like I know a lot of illustrators that make a lot of work, but you make a lot of work. Do you think, you mentioned earlier that you got obsessed with Photoshop. Do you think you have kind of an obsessive, I don't want to say personality, but do you think that's a part of you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. And it is great because if you want to know what year what Illustrator graduated, what year who else graduated with them, like
okay,
I could tell you, but or like what university they went to,
like a top trumps card.
Yeah, but also at the same time, I sometimes find like when I'm in conversation that I want to unload useless facts on people because I've retained them and I'm interested in them. So it sort of has its pros and cons. But yeah, I have a very obsessive personality and I'm really aware of it. And sometimes I try and catch myself now when I can realize I'm going down like a rabbit hole. And then suddenly buying books on weird Japanese collectibles or on and so forth.
Yeah. So what are you obsessed with now? Is it screen printing?
Yeah, screen printing. I'm really interested in screen printing. I've collected like lots of Bart toys, loads of Power Rangers stuff. I'd say like my main one at the moment is like artist monographs. So I just got like a really nice sort of like Jeff Koons one. I mean, divisive artist, but it's a really nice book. Yeah, got the Jean Julien book, which is really, really nice. Yeah, like loads of stuff. Got a whole 2 bookshelves of like alternative comics, zines, stuff like that. Yeah.
Do you find that all that wide variety of interests that you have, do you find that it informs your work much?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that whilst I'm sort of like overexposed in terms of inspiration, it's also nice sometimes to like reference other people's work, but not too obviously. Like for a while, since working at Culture Trip, I used to do quite a lot of listicle articles where it would be like 10 best places to eat in Shoreditch. But then after an amount of time, it got really hard to just draw like a gigantic plate of spaghetti in the middle of some sort of like Shoreditch architecture, right?
I remember that one.
Yeah. So like I started to think about like cartooning quite a lot and how like pages are broken up. I think sort of like one of the notable figures I would reference is somebody like Chris Ware, of how he breaks up a page, sort of taking sort of inspirations from that and then bringing it into like more of my editorial work.
I don't think I'm familiar with Chris Ware. How are you spelling his last name?
Ware. He's quite a big cartoonist. He did a book called Rusty Brown and Jimmy Corrigan I think it's Jimmy Corrigan Saves the World. I might be fully getting that wrong. That's very embarrassing. But he's very, very intelligent in terms of like narrative, sort of like storytelling, and he does like lots of paneling. Some of his comics, you can pull like a page out, you can make it into a thing. He's sort of acting as designer as well as illustrator.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Yeah.
It's part of like the old comic scene from the States, so like Charles Burns and Daniel Clowes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So with all those different kinds of influences, and you've worked on lots of different kinds of projects now, do you have, what's your favorite kind of project to work on?
Favorite project? I still really like doing editorial. There's been a few times this year where I've been working on sort of like a slightly meatier project. Like I did some jigsaw puzzles at the start of the year, and there was a lot of back and forth, and it was quite nice in between that to work on the thing for the Wall Street Journal, which was just like one image, and I just sent them this, like 2 sketches. They signed up for one of them, and I just got going with it. And it was nice working on that because it felt like there was no restraints, like between like pitching an idea and then getting it to the final artwork. It was pretty easy. But yeah, in terms of like projects generally that I've really enjoyed working on, I'd say I did like an animation for Hour of News, where I worked with an animation house called Wild Studios, and that was really good to work. I really enjoyed working on that. Sorry, there's a big car going past.
That's all right. Did you when you first graduated, did you have a very specific idea of what kind of projects you wanted to work on?
I think over time things changed. So like initially it was like I wanted to do t-shirt graphics, like cool projects, like do shows and sort of be sort of more integrated into sort of like culture and like doing like mixtape covers, stuff like that. And then I think when I went to university, I realized like a really viable option to sort of make quite a healthy living is to do editorial. And then so for quite a while, my obsession was with like doing editorial and thinking of like visual puns. I'd say that like a lot of my work no longer has many visual puns, and the type of editorial I do is more like travel, leisure kind of stuff. But there's still like a yearning for doing those fun and exciting projects where you can sort of like work with a band or something like that. It's just that opportunity hasn't rolled around.
Yeah, I think you'd probably agree that being open to lots of different kinds of projects keeps things interesting and makes you more money.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you know, when I think about the projects that I like the most, especially in the last 2 years, the projects that make me like sweat a little bit on how I'm going to do them are usually the ones that sort of at the end I'm the most happy with, sort of like high risk, high reward. So yeah, that animation job with Arab News was nice. They were really good at sort of like holding my hand and telling me exactly what they needed from me. Okay. And then in turn, I did a fun job at the NBA last year as a designer, for an animation, but there was like 10 of us, and that was like terrifying, really terrifying, like designing alongside other illustrators, getting really caught up on if my work's any good, does it look like it all fits in the same visual world. It was like a couple of weeks of being stressed, but things really nice.
Like you say, high risk, high reward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want to do those projects all the time. Like I quite like a really fluid editorial, but I guess
that's nice. Nice to mix it up.
Yeah, you've got to shake it up. You've got to. Yeah.
You mentioned trust earlier, building up trust. I think you're in a position now where you have a few clients that come back to you again and again, and they know that they can trust you to just get on with something and do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you only really need a handful of clients that keep coming back for you to be able to make like an okay living doing this. And I think that I think there's periods of times where I get like a bit burnt out and I can't give my all to everything because of the sheer number of things that I'm working on. But I really try quite hard to make sure that everything that I'm making is interesting, and I hope that or think that clients see that. Like I work with Rathbones, which is like an investment group, quite a lot, doing like their magazine covers and slowly starting to move on to other bits and bobs for them. And the topics are not what I would consider really interesting, but there's a fun challenge in trying to find an interesting in to some of those sort of like financially kind of topics. And yeah, I feel like I've worked pretty hard on those. Sometimes it's just quite nice to sort of sit down, draw up like 10 roughs and then send 3 of your favorite ones and see where it goes.
Is that your usual process?
I wouldn't say 10 for everything. I'd say maybe 4 to 5 on some.
Wow.
I'm trying to get better at not doing that because it's just a real time sap. And I think sometimes people that work with me wonder why it takes like a day or 2 or 3 to get anything over. But I think that it's really important to have like part of your practice, which is like playful. And I find sort of like the time that I spend in my sketchbook the most interesting and liberating part of my process.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's where you're just spilling out all your ideas onto the page.
Yeah, because then at some point I've got to put it in front of somebody, and then that's when I kind of get like a bit anxious. So I think that I fill my sketchbooks up in like an anxious, I don't know if this is going to be right kind of thing, then we put something in front of them that I'm really happy with or okay with, depending on sort of like the circumstances around the brief. And then it can be sort of fairly like autopilot after that.
Yeah, I've been in situations where an artist has sent work to a client and they've sent lots of different versions, lots of different sketches, or maybe they've sent lots of different color versions. And, maybe the client likes it, but to me it suggests that they've not kind of developed the skill of being able to self-edit, which I think is important.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I try and limit it down. I can think of a few briefs where I've sort of oversubscribed on the roughs, and then you kind of given them like too many options. So then they're like, we don't like any of these, but because they've seen millions of options, they don't really know which one to pick. And that's a real thing. If you go to a restaurant, it's got like a huge menu. It's
definitely.
Than if you had like 6 things. So
but if you can say you can have this one or this one,
absolutely,
it's a lot easier.
Yeah, in my sketchbook, like I'll do quite a few roughs that don't ever get seen, but that's like a part for me to enjoy.
Good.
Yeah,
that's nice. And can you, without getting too specific, maybe you could tell us about the worst job you've ever had? And I'm not talking about working in a kitchen.
Okay. It was a paper round. No, I'm just kidding. Paper round was fine. I mean, I've had like one or two. They're quite stereotypical, like illustration offences to have happen to you. Like, obviously, I'm not going to get too specific. I worked on a job a while back, and they asked for the open files. I sent them the open files, and then they made lots of edits to the artwork without sort of prior consultation.
Yeah.
That one really upset me, and I got really emotional about it and quite angry. As you would imagine.
Yeah, understandable. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit of a misstep, I think.
I've seen that happen a few times.
Yeah, and it's just, I understand the sort of use cases for wanting open files, like if you're, say, doing like a book cover design, like maybe you just need the access to the files just to make sure you can move things around when you're laying out the type, or maybe with some editorial stuff, if you're building the type around like an image that sits in the middle, maybe you just need to make some minor tweaks. But yeah, it was sort of messing with colours, taking things out of the artwork, and that just made me a bit sort of upset. But yeah, there's been a few more. Like I did a job for a nightclub in London a few years back, and did some sketches, and they didn't like the sketches, and they just pulled the plug on the project. But they'd already signed like a contract which says that they would pay, I don't know, like a third of the budget if they were going to, like a kill fee, right?
Yeah.
And they like fully refused to pay the fee, denied signing the contract, which wasn't true.
Right.
And that one really annoyed me, because it was meant to be like merch for their club night. And I must admit, I was a little bit salty, and they printed some merch with Scrooge McDuck on it, and I screen capped the merch and sent it to Disney's copyright team.
Ooh, and they do not mess around.
No, that was a very spicy moment, but it's the spiciest thing I think I've ever done.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of thing happens at every level, I feel like I can see the red flags sometimes with clients that get in touch. You think, well, I'm not sure that you're going to respect the artwork, and I'm not sure you are going to pay on time or at all sometimes. But sometimes it comes from the most unexpected kinds of clients as well. Like a nightclub, that sounds about right. But
I think that sometimes you can kind of see by the first email, like the questions that they're asking. Sometimes you just get kind of like just like a feeling that it might not be a thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, if you're in any doubt, or you see any red flags, or you think, well, this person doesn't really know what they're doing, you need to make sure you get everything in writing, and also ask them to agree to very specific terms, like your kill fee example. I mean, obviously, it doesn't work all the time because they can just deny it. And what you're going to do, you're not going to sue them because it's too expensive. It's just ain't worth the effort.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if you can send an email to one of these clients and ask them very specific questions, like saying, and you'll pay on this date or this amount. If they agree to it by email, then at least there's a trail. And even in their mind, if they're responding to something and they agree to it like that, that's making a commitment. Whether they hold it up or not, it's hard to know. Sometimes I'll email clients now, and if I suspect something's not quite right, I'll say we'll need payment up front, or at least a deposit payment for new clients, or whatever kind of excuse I'll make up. And I'd say 50% of the time I never hear from them again because they're not willing to commit, and they're obviously not serious.
Yeah, I find that sometimes as well. I use like a lot of social platforms, and I'm quite an avid user of Behance. And I find that on Behance and Dribbble, which are both like portfolio websites, that you can get quite a lot of inquiries. And I find like the minute you interject, like, could you email me? I'd need to like forward this onto my agent, that instantaneously almost all of them drop off. Yeah.
I see a lot of low quality inquiries from social media sites.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about social media, you've built up a pretty good following, but obviously at the moment or recently, Instagram has just changed the rules. And for illustrators that are working primarily with still images, it seems like they are just getting pushed out. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very funny. Like around the sort of It's Nice That era of me getting featured and stuff, sort of like blowing up, I think Instagram followed me. My account went like parabolic, and like about 65,000 people followed me, which was like absolutely nuts. But since then, sort of, it's been like living on a dying planet. So like I've never really had the most positive outlook on social media. Like I'm quite fascinated by it. I find like lots of illustrators' takes on social media interesting, but like ultimately they're private companies, and if you're not buying anything, you are like the products. So like it's one of those things where it's like I'm not surprised by any means that like they've decided to completely change the field of play, and you just kind of have to like adapt to it. But yeah, I just don't think I'd have done it. I think that Instagram's been around, TikTok's been around for like 2 or 3 years. The people that are on TikTok are doing really well. The people that aren't on TikTok have had enough time to consider being on TikTok. And I think that whilst Instagram is a great outlet as a portfolio, I think that people are very set in their ways on how they use it. It's all about curation, and I think TikTok's way more about like the randomness of seeing stuff. And I think that it's very hard to take somebody who's curated everything from who they follow to the feed and what they post, to then start throwing all sorts of stuff at them that they don't want to see. I think if I was them, I'd have built a separate platform to try and compete with TikTok, and then just push that through the advertising machine, which is Instagram, rather than upsetting their entire user base. I would say the Mark Zuckerberg like business strategy is to offer organic growth and then destroy organic growth and get people to like pay for it. And so like I've been playing with TikTok for like a year or two, and I'm doing all right on it. Like it's a different skill set, and because it's a different platform and it's a different skill set, in my head, it's a different space. Like I am a novice, and it's got nothing to do with like my drawings. But like Instagram is never going to give you 3 million views on a thing. Not that I've had 3 million views on TikTok, but it's just going to grant you access to your already secured audience. Essentially, that's how I feel about it.
Or a portion of them, anyway.
Yeah, it feels like they're both like rolling a dice, and like with TikTok, occasionally maybe like you'll come up trumps and it'll be good, and you cash in like a load of engagement. But with Instagram, 9 times out of 10, it feels like you're betting on like a losing horse. Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe for some people it's probably been good because it's made them consider sort of long-term goals rather than short-term wins. Like I feel like lots of people are on like constant content churn and posting an image and posting an image and posting an image and looking busy and looking like you're doing stuff. And I think sometimes people have missed out on doing like a really interesting long-form personal project because they want to appear active on the feed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Looking busy on Instagram is, I mean, yeah. What if you're saying yes to posting once or twice a day on Instagram? How much are you saying no to?
Yeah, and I also think they also somewhat devalues the work. Like the art that I make takes time to make, and that if I start sharing all the art all the time, people will think maybe it's a cheaper product. I don't know. The entire platform is not built for art making anyway. It's for photography and content. Like, and I think people sometimes get like the whole content thing sort of make it like, oh no, I didn't get very much engagement. Like my art mustn't be very good, and so on. We're actually there's a certain set of rules that you've got to follow, and if you don't follow those rules, most of them are unspoken. Like you just won't be rewarded in the same way that, say, like somebody who can share 4 reels a day or can post 6 times.
Yeah, there's actually very little correlation between how good the work is doesn't really have anything to do with how popular it gets on Instagram at this point, does it?
Yeah, and I would say like sort of best piece of advice for anybody is just like keep trying to make your best work as if nobody's really looking, and then sort of build it that way. I still feel like the cream will rise to the top, and I think you can apply that to more than just making the art. Like, you know, you've got to be sort of semi-savvy to be freelance, and I think that you either learn to do it and figure it out, or you don't, I guess.
If you were starting out fresh now and you wanted to build an audience, what do you think you'd do?
I'm just going to open the curtain because it's getting very dark in here. Is that better?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. If I was starting out now, it's very tough to say because it's a completely different landscape, isn't it? Like, I think I would go a slower route and like try and make more work for me than chasing clients straight away. Yeah, I don't really know.
But then you'd possibly have to have that side job as well, right?
Yeah, and I also think the landscape is slightly different. I think when I graduated, there was a big push for like working commercially, like doing editorial, working for brands, working in-house, so on and so forth. I think now there's sort of an interesting trifecta, which is between sort of like brand, like Illustrator and influencer. Like I find like a lot of the sort of like young pups are sort of like managing to sort of steer their following into funding their shop or becoming like tattoo artists, or sort of being slightly more broader than working commercially.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe that would play into it. But yeah, I think that the realms in which all of this is dictated is through the lens of like social media, essentially. Like, if the algorithm is pushing that way, like it would make sense to make career moves that help you to do that. I'm thinking this is like in two ways. I'm thinking about, firstly, knowing all the information I know now, what would I do? And also not knowing all the information, knowing how I got started, how I would apply that same thing again, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I guess when you started up, Instagram was looking very favorably on illustrators, right? It was booming.
Yeah, it was like Tumblr was like on its way out, like well and truly on its way out.
R.I.P.
Yeah, R.I.P. I still post on Tumblr.
What?
It's connected to my like website, so it's just a place I post it. There's maybe about 10 people that are engaging with this climate, if that. But
all the emo kids on Tumblr are now in their 40s.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. Yeah, it's but it is quite nice to go back to that sort of like blogging thing, because it was a real era, like sort of like 2008, like blogging era was like a real thing. Maybe a bit later than that, but it definitely felt like Instagram replaced Tumblr, because people started sort of like mood on their feed, and that kind of was like the death of it.
Did you say posting their mood on their feed?
Posting like mood boarding on their feed.
Okay, right.
Their feed is like a Pinterest board.
Right. Yeah. I can see. Yeah, I can see why that would kind of kill it for a lot of people. Yeah.
That, and I think AOL bought it out, and AOL has done quite a good job of like buying out properties and then like running them into the ground. Like I think they did it with Flickr as well, which was like a photography sharing website.
Yeah, Flickr was big time at one point.
Yeah, I used to post my work on there as well.
Yeah, me too.
It's a nice little community on there.
Yeah. You're really kind of you seem to be part of an Illustrator community. You go to a lot of events, you've got a good network, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how that is now, but especially when you were in London, how important do you think that has been to your success?
It's funny that a lot of the friends I have do the same job as me, but I don't really like see them as like work friends. Like they're just people that have whilst they do all the same things, and I probably know them through work. Like I think a lot of them have got past that point of being like work friends. Like, we have a small group of people. Andreas, who's on your agency, who's on Folio. Tatiana, who's Andreas's partner.
Who's she with? Who's Tatiana with?
Tatiana is with Central Illustration Agency.
She's got a great style.
Yeah, she's got a great style. This is what I meant by knowing where people are and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then like there's a bunch of Falmouth grads like Esme Lonsdale and Lauren Humphreys, who I've been friends with since like before I graduated.
Okay.
Just through meeting them at a group show. So yeah, it's been nice to meet people like who I've known on the internet sort of briefly, and then sort of have those physical relationships. I think when I was working from home a lot, it was a really good way to get out of the house and go like meet somebody, have a continued like social life and not being completely isolated.
I suppose
I love this job, and like I think I don't think about going to all the events and going to shows and being sort of artistically involved in stuff as being like part of my career. I just see it as like following my interests, I guess.
Fair enough. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was curious because if I imagined myself in your situation, I wouldn't be doing that. You know, I don't really get a lot of enjoyment from going to events where you could potentially network with similar people. And I think possibly a lot of illustrators are, you know, introverted and they, you know, prefer to stay in. But you don't think that's necessarily going to hold anybody back?
Not necessarily. I guess like with some context, like I lived in London for like from like 2012 till 2020, and you know, there's a big drinking culture, pub culture in London, and I sort of have my own hypothesis that it is that nobody has nice places and they all live with people, and so having people around there's not much of a culture for that. And so when there's lots of like gallery shows or private views, you know, like in Shoreditch you have like your first Thursdays, but there's always like on the first Thursday of every month there's like a bunch of gallery shows and you kind of hop around and go to the different places. It's a great way to get a fairly cheap night in.
Yeah.
So I guess like that's sort of part and parcel of one of the reasons why I used to go to them, but also you just don't know who you're going to meet. I sort of stay away from the word networking because... Oh yeah, it's a horrible word. I think when you talk about networking, you enter a situation thinking about how you can impress somebody or how you can... Or what they can do for you. Exactly. Yeah. And like whenever...
You just stopped a bit there. What were you saying?
Whenever I go to print fairs... Should we pick back up from there? And then
that was it. Yeah.
So whenever I go to print fairs, I'm always really hesitant to talk about my own work. I really like listening to what other people do. I don't really find sort of at this point like illustration chat particularly interesting.
Okay.
Like it doesn't really. It's like when you have a conversation with somebody about music and you say like, "Do you like this band?" and then they say no, and then you go, "Do you like this band?" and you go no, and you're like, "What about this band?" You're like, "Yeah, I like that band," and then like the conversation doesn't really go very far. So it's much easier just to enter a conversation, sort of open and willing to see where it goes without sort of thinking about like networking as such, I guess.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, it's good to just make friends, and especially people that are in a similar position to you that can't necessarily help you out, but meeting new, for a new illustrator, meeting other new illustrators that are on that path as well, having a bit of a support network. I imagine that would be very useful.
Absolutely. And I try sort of fairly hard at this point to like spotlight other people. Like in my studio, I often like share their work with friends and try and help them out. And I think, you know, sort of, it's important to do that and give people a hand. I think, you know, not ever with the intention of ever receiving anything back, but you know, it's a nice thing to do. And I think of endless times where I've had conversations with friends about issues or needed somebody's second opinion, like Michael Parkin, like on sort of editorial ideas. And it's just sometimes nice just to check in, see what he thinks. And if he doesn't like it, suggest a new one. And it's quite nice to have that rally because, you know, like I said, it can be quite a lonely job if you work on your own from home. And, you know, I think there's been two sort of big work booms for me, which were when I started at Culture Trip and I was surrounded by people and you could bounce ideas off people quickly. And you also had like the social pressure of making good work. And then more recently going to this new studio and sort of finding similar sort of things happening. And I feel like I've had two periods of fairly good growth in the last few years because of sort of forced dialogue around work.
Yeah. Good. let's imagine maybe we can. We've been going for just over an hour now, so maybe we could wrap it up. But I'd be interested to know. Let's say hypothetically, you knew somebody that was going to dive into freelance illustration now. What advice could you offer a new illustrator?
Good question.
Put you on the spot.
Very much so. I think the key to everything is just consistency. So that's like consistency in the art that you're making, the consistency in which you are contacting people, consistency in the way that you show your work. I think this is a thing that I've only learned through, like, sounds like so sad and lame, but I started running during the pandemic. I sort of had a low point on New Year's Day 2 years ago where I ordered 2 takeaways, and I was like, I can't do this again. Like, this is bad for my health.
Okay.
And I started running, and I think the thing I learned from doing that, sounds so lame, is that, like, if you just stay consistently just doing one thing, you'll see, like, gradual improvement as you continue to stay doing that. Where if you, like, miss days or try and push too hard at one point and then you can't maintain that, like, throughout a week or a month or whatever, that everything becomes so much harder. So it's much easier to allot time to work on stuff and break a day up by like an hour or two, then work till 4 a.m.
Nothing lame about that, Mike.
No.
All those incremental improvements in anything are enormously important. You know, much more than, you know, doing like a whole day one day and then have a few days off and then a few hours there, but doing an hour a day is going to just compound and multiply much faster. Absolutely. For sure.
And I think it's also important just for general mental health. You know, like, if you're doing late nights, you can't do that forever, and so like, you're going to get burnt out. Whereas if you stay to like a fairly normal sort of work schedule consistently, like, you'll see benefit from it and be able to do it for longer. When I said like cringe, I just meant like sort of being evangelical about sport feels just very not my brand at all. But it's been good as a means to learn sort of how to maintain some sort of capacity with other things in my life, like work. So yeah, I'd say just
be consistent. Yeah. Good
absolutely.
Advice. I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, it's been great talking to you, Mike.
Yeah, you too. It's been so nice to clock in.
Yeah. All right. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, cheers. Have a nice evening.